This is my 29th video on my work with OO gauge. See part 1 of this series for my reasons for getting into OO gauge when I already had a lot invested in working in N gauge and I didn't really have space available for a large, fully operational OO gauge layout. Also see my lengthy series on my N gauge railway modelling for smaller and more complex scenery and smaller trains running. This part is the third, dealing with my third layout to be made using mainly Hornby EZ Track. See the previous part, part 27, for my reasons for wanting to try a Hornby EZ Track layout when I already had a layout using Bachmann EZ Track. This part deals with some changes to the track plan for my Hornby layout and some testing of the intended wiring. All of this is just being done on a preliminary basis at this point, with the track laid on the board but not fixed down in any way while I fiddle with the track plan before finalizing it and moving on to building the layout on a more permanent basis. This was my track plan at the point that I bought my Hornby track from British Model Trains in Cambridge, Ontario, and started my test laying down. And here is that track plan laid down on the board, except for the turntable and its associated parking lines, which I've been holding off with until I get the basic track layout settled. As you may see, there's a certain amount of extra space on the left side of the board. The inner sidings are also rather too close to the inner loop mainline. This was the first possible revision I considered. Adding another R8073 right-hand point at bottom left before the curve of the outer siding so as to allow for two separate outer sidings. But when I measured, I found that this wasn't quite going to work, as the standard Hornby points are the same length as Hornby single straights, 168mm or about 6 2/3 inches. So this change would have pushed the left outer siding out over 6 inches from its current position, and there was actually only about 5 inches of extra space at the left of the board. So my next thought was to perhaps just leave the outer siding as it was, but move it and the left ends of the inner and outer loops to the left by about 4.5 inches by adding a 3 and a 1.5 inch straight to each of the left to right lines. This would make the loops a bit longer and allow for a very slightly longer station platform, and also improve the spacing between the sidings and the main lines. But then I had yet another thought. There was no room to add a point orientated parallel to the front edge of the board, as that would move the sidings over too much. But what if I inserted a point diagonally after the first curve? That would only move the outer sidings over by something like 4 and a bit inches, so it should just about fit. I decided that I sort of liked this idea, as it would be nice to have 2 outer sidings at the end there. But then I complicated things a bit, as I didn't particularly want to make an appointment with Nigel at British Model Trains and drive all the way up to Cambridge just to get a couple of pieces of track. So I checked what I could buy at Paris Junction Hobbies, my local hobby shop, just 10 minutes or so up the road. They really don't cater to modelling British railways, as that's not at all common here in Canada. They do carry some Pico Streamline track, as that is distributed and used widely in North America. They also carry Atlas, a very common US brand, and they also carry the Bachmann EZ Track that I used on my first OO layout. I needed a right-hand point, and I wanted one as small as possible to fit in the limited space on my board. The smallest point that Paris Junction had was a Pico Streamline small point, SL91. This was 185mm long as compared to 168mm for a standard Hornby point, so about 2/3 of an inch longer. I felt that should work okay. But the turnout arc on the Pico point was only 12 degrees, intended to be more prototypical, as against the turnout arc of 22.5 degrees on a standard Hornby point, making it equivalent to a Hornby single second radius curve. 22.5 degree arc, 438mm radius. Now it gets even a bit more complicated. I looked at what small curves Paris Junction had. The Atlas curves that were designated 18-inch radius were marked as either 1/2 or 1/3. Well, what did that mean? With some difficulty I established that what Atlas calls a single curve has a 30-degree arc, meaning 6 make up a half circle, 12 a full circle, as opposed to Hornby single curves, which have an arc of 22.5 degrees, meaning 8 make up a half circle, 16 a full circle. But people tend to use Hornby double curves with an arc of 45 degrees when making full loops. So, when Atlas say a curve is 1/3, they mean 1/3 of an Atlas single curve with an arc of 30 degrees. So the 1/3 curves have an arc of 10 degrees. So, if I add one Atlas 1/3 curve to the picot point with a 12-degree turnout arc, I'll have a turnout arc of 22 degrees, near as damn it to a Hornby single curve of 22.5 degrees. And this is what I bought from Paris Junction, a Pico SL91 right-hand point and a pack of 4 Atlas 1/3 18-inch radius curves, because packs of 4 are how they sell them. This purchase led me to this track plan revision. The Pico and Atlas pieces are shown in black and white, as I reduced them from pictures of the actual track pieces. I stuck one of the Atlas 1/3 curves on the end of one of the sidings, just because it was something I had and it made the siding a bit longer, and another Hornby R600 straight wouldn't have fit. And here is that track revision on the board. As you can see, it does just fit. The reason I have Hornby quarter straight laid next to the outer loop is that I was now thinking that I should move the end of the loops over a bit to improve the spacing. At this point, as marked, I had the isolated junction below the point, so it would have been necessary to supply switched power separately to each of the two left outer sidings. The next thing I did was to change the isolation and wiring plan for the sidings. I figured rather than putting the isolator below the point and then powering each siding with a separate switched feed, I could put the isolator above the point on one of the sidings and have a switched power feed to that siding and just use the point itself to isolate the other siding, since if the point is set to turn, no power will flow to the outer siding. So I made that revision. And I did actually put in the switched power feed on a temporary basis. I'll drill holes and pass the wires through the board for the permanent arrangement, but here I've just soldered 2 lengths of wire to 2 fish plates and used those fish plates on the next join above the isolator. Then the common side of that power connection just goes straight to the common side on the controller, and the other side goes to the switch, which is in turn connected to the other side of the controller. Of course, this is not the actual controller I'll be using for this layout, but the Tech 2 dual power I've bought hasn't been delivered yet, and my Hornby HM6000s don't work at all, so this old Bachmann controller is all I have for testing at the moment. So now let's see a little video of testing of this arrangement. Oh yeah, I'm trying a little bit of proof of concept for wiring here. I've made this joint no longer an insulated joint. So long as the point is set straight, power will flow up to that outside siding. But I've made this joint insulated, so even if the point is set curved, power will not flow up to that siding. And then I've got some wires soldered to the joiners here, coming out of that join. The ground wire, the left wire, is coming straight to the controller. The other is coming to the switch. So the switch isn't, I mean, none of this is permanent. This is all just a test for proof of concept. But so this switch now switches the power to this siding on and off. So there's no power to that siding as the switch is down. There is when it's up. Okay. And I've decided to make, as I usually do, clockwise my forward direction. So let's see if we can bring a little engine round here. If it doesn't stop somewhere. Yes, there we go. Okay, so now he's in that siding, right? He's in the outer siding. Now, if I flip the point to curved, and turn the power up, he does not come out because I've got the point there. Now I've left the power on low, and as soon as I flip the point, he's going to start moving. Now, wrong way, though. He did, but the wrong way. Okay, so now he's out of that siding, right? So now we flip the point to the other siding and make sure the power to the other siding is turned on, and we drive him into the other siding, right? So we can drive him in the other siding. But if I turn the power off to the other siding, then no, he does not move. And now I want him to move anti-clockwise, so I'll put some low anti-clockwise reverse power on, and then when I turn the switch on, he starts moving again. Okay. The main power is fed in from here, and that's going to out here because the points up there are set on. So here, and here for that matter, is getting power from the main outer circuit, but this siding is only getting power from its own feed there, which has to be switched on. And ultimately the head shunt at the far end is designed to work the same as this. It's also going to have its own dedicated power. I don't have my dual controller yet though, and of course, I mean, I'll drill holes through the board to put those wires through ultimately, but I'm still moving track around a bit, and then all the track's going to come up again anyway. This is just testing things out and making sure the ideas work.
Next, I did want to move the ends of the loops over a bit to even out the spacing between the inner and outer sidings and the main loop lines. I figured I didn't really want to move the loop ends more than a couple of inches. Paris Junction had Atlas straights in 3-inch or 1.5 inches. I thought 3 inches would be a bit too much. I could have cut pieces of flex track, of course, but it's a bit fiddly to work with that for just a small insert like this. Because you're going to get joins on both ends, and you've got to kind of pry off the sleepers to put the joins on, and it's fiddly. So I just bought a 4-pack of Atlas 1.5-inch straights from Paris Junction. This shows the loops before fitting these small pieces. The piece next to the outer loop is a Hornby R610 quarter straight, the only one of those I had left at this point. Here are the 4 Atlas small straights on the bench after having their fish plates fitted. They come with fish plates, but they don't come with them fitted. Together with one Hornby R610 quarter straight. Theoretically, the Hornby quarter straight should be slightly longer, as it's supposed to be a quarter of the Hornby single straight, which is 168mm, so 42mm, which is about 1.65 inches, whereas the Atlas straights are supposed to be 1.5 inches. However, they seem to be exactly the same length to me. And here I have fitted the small straights into the inner and outer loops at front and back, moving the ends of the loops over 1.5 inches to the left. Here are the Atlas straights at the front of the board, not the best joint. I'll see if I can do better when I lay the track permanently. And here are the Atlas straights at the back of the board at the end of where the station platforms are intended to go. I think now this is probably the track plan I'm going to proceed with, apart from the issue of adding the turntable and sorting out its associated tracks. So now, to finish for now, just a little video of retesting the loops after the insertion.
And now, a little functional test after adding the 1.5-inch extensions to the curves. I'm trying to make those look more straight. I don't know. Well, when I pin, of course, this track, I'm not going to pin this track down now anyway. But, okay, so there you go. There's the little pug. He really does go very fast. I mean, that was only 20% power the first one. There's the little pug loco going round. I can't read that. That's... Well, no, actually, I tell a lie. That's 20% power, so I guess we had about 30 before. So there's the little pug loco going around the inner loop after its extension. Whoops. And of course I turned knob the wrong way. I meant to turn the power down and I turned it up. I don't particularly care for this controller. It's one of those ones where you just, you know, there's no actual switch direction knob. You just turn the knob one way for forwards and one way for backwards. Okay. So now, let's put the points. We'll set the points to turn him over to the inner loop. And we'll take him anti-clockwise again. And of course he stops once he goes over the point, because I've only got one power controller now and there's no power hooked up to the outer loop. So I have to take the Bachmann power clip I'm using and somehow see if I can manage to insert it into the outer loop, and now he should have power on the outer loop. And we'll just go and change that point. And there he goes, round the outer loop over the new little 1.5 inch extension. And I could have used bits of set track for that, but I don't know, I just didn't fancy trying to cut little bits of set track like that. I figured it was less effort to just buy the short antler straights that were available at the hobby store up the road. So there you are. I think, unless I have second or third or fourth thoughts, that's pretty much the layout I'm going to stay with. I'm not, at the moment anyway, well of course the you can't see my hand, can you? The turntable's going to go in over there, so we're going to get the turntable in, and then I've got to figure out how to make you know, tracks coming off the turntable, which will be made mainly with flex track, but we'll see. But other than dealing with a turntable, I think this is probably the way the track is going to be.